Chapter 9. Clients. P&G, Eversharp, Rupert. Some 20 years ago, when the Biow company was still fairly small and anxious to have more top advertisers recognize its worth, we received a call from Procter & Gamble's people to meet them at Cincinnati's Queen City Club and present a picture of our agency. This was the thrill of thrills, one of the most illustrious names in industry to add to our roster. We hoped. I had already met two of their men in New York. The meeting had been arranged by one of our vice presidents, Jean Bonvard, who had worked with P&G for years. With my usual optimism, I had a feeling then that they were favorably impressed. Evidently they were, because shortly afterward we had a call from them. They didn't say exactly what I hoped to hear, I must admit. "We have just assigned Ivory Snow to Benton and Bowles," was the message. But they said enough to keep my expectations high. They hadn't forgotten us, one man added. I should be patient. We would hear from them soon, and very soon we did. We hurried to Cincinnati, Banvart and I. Gene didn't waste any time on that trip. While we were on the plane, he gave me a thorough rundown on all the things they would want to know, to be sure I had all the answers. I was ready for that presentation. This was a big meeting. Ready though I was so intent on landing a piece of Procter & Gamble business that I was as nervous as a novice. But I quickly got over that. The warmth of these men, the way they asked their questions, thorough as they were, soon put me at my ease. They seemed to be on our side. Yet in their friendly way, there wasn't a thing they overlooked. There was nothing they didn't find out about our operations. They listened carefully while I told them what we had done for our other clients and what we knew we could do for Procter & Gamble. Then I added, smiling, that I was sure that somewhere, some soap was lying under a table, almost forgotten. If they would give it to us, we could prove our worth. All I wanted, I said, was a chance to get started. When I got all through, I found they were quite prepared to take me at my word. They had already looked under the table, and what they had found was their smallest brand, Lava Soap. Now that they were satisfied with us, that's what they would give us. William G. Werner, manager of P&G's advertising division, sensed that we didn't yet smell soap. He offered to help us smell it, and he proved to be quite a tutor. I'll never forget the first sales meeting I attended in Cincinnati. I had never been to one before, and I had no idea how important they were. I was completely unprepared. No sales charts, no diagrams, no speech, no anything. Agency after agency got up and talked about their products. Each had a prepared speech with charts, diagrams, the works. Then they called on me. Poor guy. Nothing but a bar of lava soap. Procter & Gamble called me to Cincinnati to talk advertising, I began. Eagerly, I took a fast plane out. They gave me lava soap, and I took a slow train back. Of course they laughed. But over their laughter, I said in all seriousness, "But, gentlemen, on that slow train, I thought of all the things we can do with lava, and we are ready to do them now." It was a short speech. Lava wasn't entitled to more. But the men responded. I could tell that they were with me. I knew they'd get out there and sell more than they had before. Lava soap was selling to a limited market. Procter & Gamble saw lava as one to remove deep-down dirt, saw it as a soap for factories and farmers. We felt strongly we could go further. If lava got the deep dirt, it got the top dirt. And that included everyone. Lava soap was gray. The sales staff complained that too many wash bowls were stained with lava. I complained that there weren't enough of them. We wanted more. It wasn't that I liked the gray bar. I thought it just about the most unattractive cake of soap in America. But it was the largest seller in its field. You think twice before you change a thing like that. What we did to start off was to make the grayness sound like an asset. We did it with the slogan, "The good gray bar with the creamy white lather." Now lava has been changed to white. All the better, more people like it. But it was still gray when we started our efforts to broaden the market. One campaign we submitted was a honey. It shook the rafters at Procter & Gamble, and the public got a version only slightly watered down. The campaign led off with a big newspaper ad. In the layout we submitted, a dirty-handed man was holding a slightly disheveled but nice-looking girl, and the headline read, "Why can't a man keep his hands off a girl? Till they're clean?" The younger men loved it. But Procter & Gamble's dignified sales manager, Clarence Huff, shook his head. "What do you suppose the Procters and Gambles would have said about our running ads like this?" he asked me. Well, they weren't there, so we'll never know. But in deference to Mr. Huff's objection, we removed the man from the picture and left just the slightly disheveled girl. In any case, the ad died young. The Bible Belt objected, and we killed it. We always had to remember that while every family needed lava soap, particularly if there were children, it was in the factory where hands got really grimy that lava was indispensable. The Second World War meant, among other things, more dirty hands in the factories and more sales for lava soap. I called Procter & Gamble one day about another advertising idea which we were testing. It had already proved right on a small scale, and we were excited about going ahead with it at once without the further testing they usually require. Time is with us, I remember telling them on the phone. The war is here now. I can promise you more research, all the research you want, anytime you want it. But there is one thing I can't promise you. I can't promise that the wartime industrial boom is going to last indefinitely. Let's turn on the campaign now. And they did. Timing is everything. I didn't like the fact that it took a war to create a larger market, but the war was on and this was our work. It was one example of getting speed from Procter & Gamble when speed was needed. Once during the war, I was riding in an elevator at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. We had just got the lava soap account and it had started to grow. Mr. Huff was talking to me. "Mr. Biow," he asked, "do you think your advertising is making lava soap sales go up, or is it business conditions, more workers in the factories?" "Do you think your stockholders really care?" was the answer I gave him. He smiled and said, "I guess not." My answer was quick, but his question was valid. Too often a business credits its success to its advertising campaign without studying the effect of market conditions. Many things other than advertising contribute to a company's success. When a company ignores this and keeps running a campaign just because sales are climbing, it can very well be running the wrong campaign. But when advertisers assume that a booming market means it is time to cut advertising, they could be running a fever. To the question, do you think your stockholders care? The right answer is they should care. They stand to lose the extra business they could get if they considered all the facts. If the advertising is right and business conditions are right, you will sell more than if either one is wrong. What could be more obvious? You can't relax and call your campaign good just because business is good. In fact, even if your campaign is good, you still can't relax. Just around the corner, there's somebody trying to top you. From lava soap to get our feet wet, as Procter & Gamble had put it, we went on to other brands. Among them were names that became known: Spic and Span, Joy, Lilt, and Fluffo. Spic and Span was a great challenge. It was sold to clean walls and woodwork, a twice-a-year job, spring and fall. You know what happens to seasonal products. Generally, they get nowhere. No sooner would the Spic and Span advertising reach a crescendo than the spring would be over and you had no use for the product until the fall. When fall house cleaning time came around, you either dug out what was left of your old Spic and Span, or more likely, you forgot Spic and Span completely and used anything else you had around the house. How could we make Spic and Span an all-year-round necessity? Surely not for walls and woodwork, except for occasional spots. Certainly not for ceilings. The only place left was the floor. On the floor in America was what? Linoleum. Great! Linoleum needs cleaning at least once a week. We prepared a campaign for Spic and Span to clean linoleum. I overlooked just one thing. Spic and Span wasn't good for linoleum. It would wear linoleum out faster. That might not bother the linoleum dealers, quite the contrary. But naturally, Procter & Gamble wouldn't and couldn't look at it that way. They would have to improve Spic and Span to protect the linoleum, to bring out, not destroy its colors, or our campaign was out. Howard Morgans, now Procter & Gamble's president, has said, "Advertising is often one of the greatest spurs to product improvement." Here was a perfect example. The P&G chemist went to work, and in a short time, we had exactly the product we needed. Now Spic and Span would clean linoleum. Not clean it like other products, but clean it better than anything else, and easier. Unlike sudsy products, it needed no rinsing. So our ads illustrated a woman cleaning a linoleum floor and said, "Just once over, no rinsing, no wiping." Now the advertising became all-year-round advertising. No more stops and starts. We could sell Spic and Span every day to women who had linoleum underfoot. What we thought would happen did happen. Almost at once, the business started to climb, leaving the valleys behind, and the largest part of its tonnage soon was, and still is, used to clean floors. This is one of the great satisfactions of having a client like Procter & Gamble, a client who will enthusiastically get behind a new selling idea, who is ready to change the product when need be, and with a research and development division where only the impossible takes a little time. Which twin has the Toni? Was way up on top of the totem pole. In fact, numbers 2, 3, and 4 in the home permanent field were so far below that they didn't even count. Which twin has the Toni? Took hold and swept the product to national success. It said to women in unmistakable terms, here are two identical girls. One gave herself a Toni, the other went to a beauty salon. One paid $1 and the other paid $25. That was a big bargain. It looked like a story you couldn't beat. It seemed to sew up the market. During that period, 4 men from Procter & Gamble came to see me in my office, and with their usual courteous approach said to me, Mr. Biow, we are bringing out a product called Lilt that will give a better home permanent than Toni. We were wondering whether you would like to have the business. I got up. I locked the door. I went back to my desk and created an answer. Yes, I said. That was a problem. How could you stop? Which twin has the Toni? Well, I saw it. I knew I had the answer. Though the ads phrased it differently later, at a Procter & Gamble sales meeting in Cincinnati, I said, Toni competes with the professional hairdresser. We compete with God, and you can't top God. Our advertisement sang out, Lilt looks, feels, behaves like the loveliest naturally curly hair. I made one mistake. At that same meeting, I told the men that we would stop Toni from using their slogan within 6 months. They stopped in 4. We introduced Lilt in Cincinnati and Indianapolis. Under the Naturally Curly Hair campaign, Lilt started to build. It built so fast it worried Toni, and they quickly did something about it. They dropped, Which twin has the Toni? They changed their ads to read, Which is the girl with the natural curl, and which is the girl with the Toni? They did it so fast, all over the nation, that they got to most areas before Procter & Gamble had enough Lilt ready. That pulled some of the bounce away from us and made the fight a little harder. But the tougher the fight, the better the fun. While Lilt was with us, their sales reached 21% of the total home permanent market. By now, it is up to 30%. Lilt is practically breathing down Toni's neck just under the curls. Let's look again for a moment at the group of men we worked with at Procter & Gamble back in 1940. Mr. Neil H. McElroy, then manager of advertising and promotion. Now chairman of the board, Mr. Howard J. Morgans. Then manager of the copy section, now president, Mr. W. Rowell Chase. Then manager of the brand promotion division, now executive vice president, Mr. Walter L. Lingle, then brand group head, later executive vice president, currently on a leave of absence to serve with NASA, Mr. Donald H. Robinson. Then brand group head, now vice president and group executive in charge of overseas operations, Mr. William G. Werner, then manager of the advertising division, later director of public and legal services, now retired. What a magnificent picture of a company. The story of these men is the story of Procter & Gamble. They build on men. They believe as strongly in manpower development as in product development. They hire men young. They choose creative men with potential. Then, to quote one of their people, they grow their own executives. Ability, not seniority, is their only guide. I've seen men time and again moved up over and above. Constantly moving proven men up keeps a company young. That's probably one reason why Ivory Soap, for example, still first after 80 years, keeps growing. The brand men in charge are once again young men who want to move up higher. Challenged with the opportunity to make a brand grow, the men eagerly cooperate with the advertising agency. If they spot an idea that they think will move goods, they meet you more than halfway. They load you with facts to build on. They go to all lengths. We've seen the company more than once improve a product to meet a proposed advertising claim. When we first started to work with Procter & Gamble, I expected it to be quite a change of pace. I'm an edge-of-the-seat man, a do-it-yesterday man, and I didn't see how an organization the size of P&G could operate that way. To my delight, I quickly discovered they were just as edge of the seat as I was. When you needed speed, you got speed. In spite of their huge organization, in spite of the number of people who have to approve an idea, their size never stopped them from taking full advantage of a program that needed fast action. I found P&G one of the most gratifying of all organizations to work with. I treasure the experience. I treasure the warm friendships that have grown out of it. One day, one of our people walked into my office for a chat. He had a book under his arm. It was a copy of Margaret Mead's Male and Female. "What are you reading?" I asked. "I'm reading about the two most important people in the world." "Who?" I said. "Procter and Gamble?" "Martin L. Strauss II. And I became close friends. I had met him at Philip Morris. He was a stockholder there and kept pretty close to what we were doing. Martin was an entrepreneur with a weather eye, always out for some new enterprise to stir his blood. While Eversharp was one of the old-line pen and pencil companies, a big one in its heyday. But it was slipping downhill fast. Martin Strauss and his group bought it, dropped the name Wall, and called the company Eversharp. It was sort of a fling for them. They would play around with it for a year, then most likely sell it and take their money out. They had bought it cheap enough to make that possible. Martin said to me, "We'd like to spend about $300,000 over the year for advertising. When that's finished, if we're still losing, out we go." Why wait a whole year to lose money? I said, when you can lose it in 6 months, then you have 6 months left to make back your money. I have an idea that will cost you exactly double. It will cost $300,000 for 6 months. But I have a hunch it will win. It's a spot for radio called Take It or Leave It. Martin was a gambler. "Okay," he said. "We'll try it." The program worked like magic. Before the 6 months had passed, business started to go up, and up some more. Before many years had passed, Eversharp was spending $6 million a year for advertising. In 1940, when our advertising started, Eversharp's sales volume totaled $1,900,474. By the beginning of 47, it was $47,211,000. And their net profit after taxes was over $4,200,000. Take It or Leave It was one of the first audience participation shows on radio, certainly the most renowned. For many years, it was a top show on radio, with a phenomenal audience. Except for a few brief interludes, it ran for 12 years. The germ of the idea was the brainchild of an educator, Dr. Peter G. Cranford of Atlanta, Georgia. It took a lot of muscle and bone to build the show up from what Dr. Cranford sold us to what finally went on the air. Nevertheless, as long as the show was on radio and, later in a new form, on television, he received royalties regularly. Take It or Leave It was the birthplace of the $64 question, a phrase that became part of the language. The tough, imponderable question. Everybody used it, including President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. It even made Bartlett's familiar quotations. It was a lively show, fun for everyone who had a hand in it and everyone who heard it. The contestants were picked from the studio audience and were asked questions for bigger and bigger winnings by the MC. The audience was right in their pitching. They either cheered the contestants on with take it," or called in unison, "You'll be sorry." What a parade of notables we used as MCs. Bob Hawke, Phil Baker, Eddie Cantor, Ralph Edwards, Gary Moore, and later, Jack Parr. Every one of these men did a beautiful job. We pretty much gave them their heads. We had only one word of caution. Don't tell jokes for jokes' sake. Build them only out of the show so the show keeps moving, and moving fast. Phil Baker MC'd Take It or Leave It probably longer than anyone else, and he handled it masterfully. He had a great sense of timing and never let the show bog down. Phil got married while he was working with us. His wife was a fine girl, deeply interested in Phil's career. I remember she came to me one day looking very earnest and said, "Mr. Biow, I'd like to see a star outside Phil's room." "Mrs. Baker," I said, looking her in the eye, "what interests me is the star inside that room." Schaefer and Parker were far ahead when we started Take It or Leave It for Eversharp. As so often happens, they didn't notice the little fellow coming up until too late. It seemed to me they just kept busy fighting each other. The Parker Pen Company advertised their pens from $5 up, but only their pens from $10 up had the 5-year guarantee. This left the $5 pen open for us, and we hit it hard. We came on the air for Eversharp and said, manufacturing facilities permit us to introduce a pen for $5 with a full-time guarantee. That beat the Parker $5 pen. But then came the Socko that helped send us soaring. The Eversharp pen is guaranteed not for years, not for life, but guaranteed forever. Nobody could beat that. We did get into a little difficulty with the government. They thought forever was too long. But our answer to that one was simple. Too long for what? As long as we guarantee the pens forever and exchange the pens forever, why can't we say forever? From time to time as we went along, we added new ideas. We always tried to put the competition on the defensive. When we got them to answer us on our grounds, we had a pretty good idea who would win. One of the key lines we used in advertising Eversharp was, "Give Eversharp and you give the finest." The thinking behind this sentence was part of our basic strategy. The field was dominated by prestige brands. We had to raise Eversharp above them. We pounded the line hard. We pounded it so hard that a long-established bank in New York, the Manhattan Savings Bank, which was opening new offices, chose Eversharp pens to give to people opening new accounts. They decided on Eversharp because, to quote their words, "To give Eversharp is to give the finest, and we want to give the finest." So successful was this promotion that when the bank opened its doors on a cold, raw December morning, the people waiting for Eversharps were lined up 3 abreast all the way around the block. The police had to keep the crowds in order. In 2 days, the bank opened over 20,000 accounts to the tune of $1,200,000. This was a forerunner of today's ubiquitous bank giveaways. Give Eversharp and you give the finest. Push, pull. Click, click, push, pull. Click, click, change blades. That quick! Read this to yourself once or twice. Put a lilt into it the way they did it on the air. See how happy it sounds. How it sells. Push, pull. Click, click, change blades. That quick! This rhythmic phrase was created for Eversharp. Schick injector razors by Bob Goldsmith of the Biow company. A good advertising man. A solid copywriter who knows the ways of making people buy. Eversharp acquired the Schick injector razor, changed the name to Eversharp Schick, and went to work on it with the same aggressiveness they had used to build their pen business. When we began using our push-pull rhyme for Eversharp Schick razors, I predicted to Martin Strauss that it would force Gillette to change their razor. People would no longer be satisfied with that awkward, old-fashioned construction, putting blades in and taking them out by hand and cutting themselves in the process. In 2 years of push-pull, click-click, our business doubled, and we started to cut in on Gillette. Then Gillette changed, as we knew they would. But they met us only halfway. That was as far as they could go. Now, you didn't have to touch their blades to put them in, but you still had to touch them when you took them out. They met the push-pull, all right, but not the click-click. But at least we had forced them to change. And as we have said before, when you force your competitor to change his ideas because of you, you know you're on your way. Eversharp started to build its razor business solidly. They became number 2 in the blade business, second only to Gillette. From a sales volume of $4,776,000 in 1944 when they took over the business, they rose by 1947 to $10,963,000 and by 1948 to $15,256,000. In drugstores, where the bulk of blades was sold, their share of the razor blade business was 28.4%. Even though the quality of the blades was good, we urged them to make them even better and to cut down their advertising if necessary to do so. But they were afraid of losing momentum. Advertising is no substitute for improvement. It cannot be used to cover up errors. Advertising exposes them. If you are right, you grow faster. If you are wrong, you lose faster. That's how advertising works. Somewhere along the line, Martin Strauss gave up control of the business. The new group wanted their own agency, and we were out. But there was fun and excitement all the way while it lasted. After Take It or Leave It had been off radio for several years, Mr. Lou Cowan came to see me and offered to buy the show to put on television. His top prize was to be not $64, but $64,000. I told him we would not sell the show, but would go half on the profits with him. He gave us a rundown on the ramifications he was planning, and it all sounded fine, completely honest and above board. I'm sure Lou Cowan never dreamed it would be anything else. He's much too decent a person. At $64, the show was fun. It was a game and the public loved it. But at 64,000, it was not just fun. At $64,000, it became a vehicle of corruption. The public loved it even more at first, but soon got the shock of their lives. Since the program was out of our hands, I don't know to this day just where or when the corruption began to creep in. But creep in it did. It spoiled one of the finest shows that was ever on the air and ruined a lot of important reputations. You know about the man who heard of a calamity that befell an acquaintance? He said, "It could have been worse. It could have happened to me." With the $64,000 question, several of our own clients could have said just that or thought it. The producer had offered them the program when it first came up for sponsorship, but for various reasons they decided against it. When the program became a national mania, they rued the day they declined it. But when the program became a national disgrace, it could have been worse. It could have happened to them. The Knickerbocker Story. I cannot understand to this day why Jacob Ruppert did not bequeath the ball club and sell the brewery. The Colonel certainly missed on that one, and left a sinking business that had to be rescued by the legatees. But the ball club, the Yankees, was extracurricular. The brewery, sinking or not, was his life work, so he misguidedly left that to his family. The Colonel, in his own way, was quite a publicity man. He made a tasty brew of his Yankees and his beer, and by one means or another the two were almost always in print together, usually with the Colonel's smiling face very much in the picture. The brewery itself he ran like a real old-world autocrat. What he said went. Anybody else by his lights was interfering. One would think he owned the business 100%. He didn't. The Colonel's brother, George, owned a large share of it, but that hardly bothered brother Jacob. George Ruppert, who could certainly have run the brewery, was kept pretty much on the outside looking in until suddenly Jacob died. George was then 60 years old, a little late as it turned out for him to take over. He died too within a few years, and there stood the brewery, leaderless. Luckily, George Ruppert had an enterprising son-in-law, Murray Vernon. Successful in his own field, the manufacture of stationery, Vernon saw in the brewery the possibilities of a bright future for his young sons, Ruppert and Murray Jr. For their sakes he devoted himself, without pay, to the brewery, and a good thing he did. At my urging, he later became president. When we were called in on the account in 1949, it didn't take long to find out that this was going to be a tough one. Ruppert made only a heavy beer. It was still playing to yesterday's taste. Under Jacob Ruppert's dynamic management, and with the ball club publicity to support it, Ruppert had kept selling this dark beer, enough of it to keep the company going. But when Jacob Ruppert died, the public seemed alarmingly willing to let the beer die with him. What the company failed to realize was that a new breed of beer drinker had taken over. The young were the big beer drinkers now, whereas the average age of the Ruppert customer was over 40. Young people wanted light beer. Plenty of other brewers made it, and the effect on Ruppert's volume was nothing short of disastrous. Henry Turnbull of the Biow company quickly put his finger on the trouble. He called on hundreds of stores and bars, and everywhere he went the story was the same. Light, light, light. The bulk of beer drinkers wanted light beer. The solution seemed simple. All we needed was a light beer. The public would buy it. We would keep our dark beer and add a light one. People could buy whichever they wanted. We'd be out of the woods. But it didn't prove that simple. We added a light beer, but the public still didn't buy it. Back we went to find out why. We came to one conclusion. The new young beer drinkers didn't want what the name Ruppert now stood for, light or dark. We needed a new name and needed it quickly. Ruppert had been an important name in the beer business for decades. To change it took guts, even though business was bad. We saw one big chance, to take hold of the name Knickerbocker, formerly used on Ruppert's premium beer and advertised quite a lot in New York. If we could take that name and put it on our regular priced beer, we would have a head start. Mr. Vernon said go, and that started us off. We embarked on a fresh, young approach. We created a living trademark, Father Knickerbocker, who appeared on the handsome new label. in newspaper ads, on radio and television. We created a sound effect knock knock for Knickerbocker, dreamed up by Bob Goldsmith of our office. And Father Knickerbocker knock knocked, on radio, on television, in innumerable personal appearances, until his knuckles were raw. So did the salesman. They knock knocked everywhere they called. Soon at bars, clubs, and restaurants, you'd hear that knock knock of customers ordering Knickerbocker beer. The brewery's volume when we started the drive on Knickerbocker was down to some 1 million barrels a year. With everybody pitching in, the executives, the salesmen, everybody in the company, the advertising built the business until it hit well over 2 million barrels, the largest volume in its entire history. The agency that eventually took over the account started tied off by changing the basic idea. Controlled impatience had no place here, and little by little, sales slipped way down again. Now, Ruppert is back with an agency made up of Biow Company alumni, people like Henry Turnbull and Mike Sassanoff. With Ruppert Vernon now vice president in charge of advertising at the brewery, they are back to the old idea that is still new, back to the young approach. And sales figures already have begun to show that the Jacob Ruppert Brewery is on its way back, we hope, to the volume it built once before. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check our link in the description, where you'll find many other fundamental marketing books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more persuasion and direct response content. See you in the next one.